They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody warns you what happens when that blood turns toxic. I'm Sarah, and for 26 years, I believed that being a good daughter meant disappearing into the shadows of my family's needs. I thought love meant sacrifice, even when that sacrifice was slowly killing me from the inside. But on a cold February morning, I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the price of staying silent. What I found in my mother's bedroom that day didn't just shatter my heart. It made me realize I'd been living a lie for my entire life. Growing up in our small ranch house in suburban Ohio, I learned early that my role was to be the invisible daughter. Not invisible because I was overlooked, but invisible because I made everyone else's problems disappear. Dad worked construction when his back wasn't acting up, which seemed to be more often than not. Mom cleaned houses for wealthy families across town, her hands always raw from chemicals and her spirit always heavy from exhaustion. And then there was my sister Emma, 3 years younger, who everyone agreed was the star of our family. Emma got straight A's without trying. Emma played violin like an angel. Emma had college scouts calling when she was just 15. Emma was everything I wasn't, and everything I was expected to make possible. I remember being 12 years old, sitting at our kitchen table with my homework spread out, when Mom sat down across from me. Her eyes were red from crying, though she tried to hide it behind a tired smile. "Sarah, honey, I need to talk to you about something important." I set down my pencil and looked at her, already knowing that whatever she was about to say would change something fundamental about my life. "Your father and I have been talking. Emma has a chance to go to that special music camp this summer, the one that could really help her get into a good college. But it's expensive, and with Dad's back problems." She didn't need to finish. I already understood. I was 12, but I understood that my summer job at the ice cream shop wouldn't be for spending money on movies and clothes like other kids. It would be for Emma's future. "I know it's a lot to ask," Mom continued, her voice getting smaller. "But you're so responsible, Sarah. You're the one we can count on. Emma, she's gifted, but she's not practical like you. She needs us to take care of the details while she focuses on her talent." I nodded, because that's what good daughters do. They nod and smile and make everything work, even when something deep inside them is screaming that this isn't fair. That was the summer I learned that love in our family had conditions. Love meant being useful. Love meant being the one who solved problems instead of creating them. Love meant being grateful for the chance to disappear into the background while everyone else got to shine. For the next 14 years, I perfected the art of being the solution. When Dad's construction company went under, I took a second job to help with the mortgage. When Mom's car died, I co-signed for a loan I couldn't really afford. When Emma needed help with her college applications, I spent weeks researching scholarships and writing her essays while she practiced violin. I told myself this was what families did for each other. I told myself that my parents' pride in Emma's achievements was enough. I told myself that being needed was the same as being loved. But sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I would lie in my childhood bed and wonder what it would feel like to be someone's first choice instead of their last resort. I wondered what it would feel like to have someone ask about my dreams instead of just assuming I didn't have any. I worked as a medical receptionist at a family clinic, a job that required patience and organization but didn't challenge me in any meaningful way. I'd studied graphic design in community college, back when I thought I might have a career that excited me. But graphic design was a luxury, and my family needed practical solutions more than they needed my artistic ambitions. So I filed insurance claims and answered phones and scheduled appointments, and I sent most of my paycheck home to help with whatever crisis had emerged that month. Emma was in her junior year at a prestigious music conservatory, and the costs kept climbing. Dad's back surgery had helped, but now there were medical bills. Mom's cleaning business was struggling because her wealthy clients had started hiring larger companies. Everyone always had a reason why they needed my help. Everyone always had a crisis that only I could solve. And I gave and gave and gave, because I thought that's what love looked like. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought I was being selfless and mature and responsible. I thought I was earning my place in a family that might not have chosen me if we weren't related. What I didn't understand was that I was slowly erasing myself, one sacrifice at a time. The morning that changed everything started like any other. It was a Tuesday in February, one of those gray Ohio days where the sky looks like it's pressing down on the world. I'd driven over to Mom and Dad's house to drop off groceries, something I did every week because their food budget was always tight. Mom had called in sick to work, which was unusual. She was the type who showed up even when she had the flu, partly because she couldn't afford to miss the money and partly because she prided herself on being reliable. But that morning, she texted me at 7 a.m. saying she had a migraine and asking if I could handle the grocery run. I let myself in with my spare key, arms full of bags from the supermarket. The house was quiet except for the sound of the television playing softly in the living room. I assumed Mom was resting in her bedroom, so I tried to be quiet as I put away the groceries, but as I was loading items into the refrigerator, I heard voices coming from the bedroom. Not just Mom's voice, there was someone else there. A man's voice, but not Dad's. Dad was supposed to be at his doctor's appointment that morning. My first thought was that maybe Mom had called someone to help her with something. Maybe a neighbor. Or a family friend. But something about the tone of the conversation made me pause. It was too intimate, too soft. There was laughter I'd never heard from my mother before. I stood frozen in the kitchen, holding a carton of milk, listening to my mother's voice drift down the hallway. She was talking to someone the way she'd never talked to Dad in all the years I'd been alive. There was lightness in her voice, a kind of joy that I'd forgotten she was capable of, and then I heard her say something that made my blood turn cold. 23 years, Michael. 23 years I've been pretending to be happy with Harold, and I'm so tired of it. The girls will understand eventually. Emma's almost finished with school, and Sarah's always been independent. She'll be fine. My legs felt weak. I set the milk down on the counter with shaking hands and tried to process what I'd just heard. 23 years. That meant my mother had been pretending for my entire life. That meant everything I'd built my identity around. Being the responsible daughter, being the one who held the family together, was based on a lie. I heard more murmuring from the bedroom, and then my mother's voice again, clearer this time. I know leaving will be hard on Harold financially. But Sarah's been taking care of most of the bills anyway. She's got a good job, and she's always been so responsible. She'll help him figure it out. The casual way she said it, like I was just another utility that would keep the lights on after she was gone. Like my entire adult life had been nothing more than preparation for the moment when she would abandon us and leave me to pick up the pieces. I heard footsteps in the hallway, and I panicked. I grabbed the remaining grocery bags and hurried out the back door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. 23 years of lies. 23 years of me believing I was helping to preserve something sacred, something worth preserving. 23 years of sacrificing my own dreams and ambitions to support a family that existed only in my imagination, and the worst part, the part that made me feel physically sick, was realizing that I'd been groomed for this moment my entire life. All those years of being told I was the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who could handle anything, it hadn't been praise. It had been preparation. I'd been trained to be the caretaker who would remain behind when everyone else got to start their real lives. I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head, searching for some other interpretation, some way to make them mean something different than what they so clearly meant, but there was no other interpretation. My mother was planning to leave my father. She was planning to leave me with the responsibility of taking care of him. And she was planning to do it after I'd already spent more than a decade supporting them both financially and emotionally. That night, I sat in my small apartment and tried to figure out how I'd become so invisible to the people who claimed to love me. How I'd become so disposable that my mother could plan my entire future without even consulting me, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd never allowed myself to feel before. Not just hurt, not just disappointment, but pure, clean anger. The kind of anger that burns away everything that isn't true. I realized I'd been living my life according to rules that no one else in my family was following. I'd been playing a game where I was the only one who didn't know the rules could be changed, but if they could change the rules, so could I. I didn't confront my mother immediately. I'd learned over the years that direct confrontation in my family usually led to gaslighting, tears, and somehow ending up as the person who needed to apologize. Instead, I did what I did best. I observed and I planned over the next few weeks. I started paying attention to things I'd previously ignored. I noticed that Mom's migraines seemed to coincide with Dad's doctor appointments. I noticed that she'd been taking phone calls outside, claiming they were from her cleaning clients. I noticed that she'd been buying new clothes, subtle but nicer than anything she'd worn in years. I also started looking at my own life with new eyes. I calculated how much money I'd contributed to my family over the past decade. The number was staggering. I could have bought a house, or gone back to school, or traveled the world. Instead, I'd funded Emma's education and my parents' lifestyle while my own dreams gathered dust. I started asking myself uncomfortable questions. What did I want from my life? What would I do if I wasn't responsible for everyone else's happiness? Who would I be if I wasn't defined by my usefulness to my family? The answers scared me because they revealed how much of myself I'd buried. I wanted to go back to school and study graphic design seriously. I wanted to travel and see places that existed beyond the 50-mile radius of my current life. I wanted to date someone who saw me as more than just a reliable support system. I wanted to wake up in the morning and think about my own goals instead. of everyone else's problems, but most of all, I wanted to feel like I mattered to someone. Not because of what I could do for them, but because of who I was. So I started making quiet changes. I opened a separate bank account that my family didn't know about. I started putting money aside each month. Not much, because I was still supporting everyone else, but enough to feel like I was building something for myself. I started updating my resume and portfolio. I researched graphic design programs and scholarship opportunities. I began imagining a life that belonged to me, but I also started setting boundaries, small ones at first. When Dad called asking me to co-sign for a new truck, I said I needed to think about it. When Mom asked me to cover Emma's spring break trip, I said I was having a tight month financially. When Emma called crying about her roommate situation and wanting me to help her find a new apartment, I listened but didn't immediately offer to handle all the logistics. Each boundary felt like a small rebellion. Each no, or let me think about it, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd given away without realizing it, but my family noticed. They noticed and they didn't like it. You seem different lately, Mom said during one of our weekly phone calls. More distant. I'm just busy with work, I replied, which was partly true. I'd been working extra hours to save money for my escape plan. You know we rely on you, Sarah. You're the strong one in this family. We need you to be, you. The strong one. The reliable one. The one who could handle anything. I heard these phrases differently now. They weren't compliments. They were chains. I'm still me, Mom. I'm just focusing on some personal goals right now. There was a pause on the line, and when she spoke again, her voice had that tone I knew well. The tone that meant I was being selfish, that I was forgetting my place in the family hierarchy. Personal goals are important, honey, but family comes first. You know that. We've always been there for each other. Always been there for each other. I almost laughed. When had they been there for me? When had anyone in my family ever asked what I needed or wanted or dreamed about? Of course, Mom. Family is important. I said the words she needed to hear, but I didn't mean them the way I used to. I was learning the difference between being supportive and being a doormat. I was learning that love shouldn't require the complete erasure of self, but I was also learning to be careful. My family was used to my compliance, and my sudden independence was making them nervous. I could feel them watching me more closely, trying to figure out what had changed. I needed to be smart about this. I needed to plan my escape carefully, because I was beginning to understand that my family would not let me go easily. They built their stability on my sacrifices, and they wouldn't willingly give up that foundation. So I continued playing the role of the good daughter while secretly preparing for the day when I would stop performing that role forever. I found a graphic design program at a university 3 hours away. I researched apartments in that city. I calculated how much money I'd need to support myself without any help from my family. I started imagining a life where my phone didn't ring with constant requests for help, where my paycheck belonged to me, where my dreams were more than just fantasies I entertained late at night. It would take time. It would take courage. But for the first time in my life, I was planning something entirely for myself, and that felt like the most radical act of love I'd ever committed. Love for the woman I'd never allowed myself to become. For several months, I lived in this strange liminal space between my old life and the new one I was secretly building. On the surface, everything looked normal. I still answered when my family called. I still helped with emergencies. I still showed up for Sunday dinners with a smile and a casserole, but underneath, I was changing in ways they couldn't see. I was becoming someone I'd never been before, someone who had boundaries, someone who had plans that didn't revolve around other people's needs. My mother seemed to relax as the weeks passed. Maybe she thought my brief period of independence had been a phase. Maybe she thought I'd remembered my place in the family structure. She started talking more openly about her future plans, though she still didn't know I'd overheard her conversation with Michael. I'm thinking about making some changes, she said one evening as we sat in her kitchen, folding laundry together. Your father and I haven't been happy for a long time. You've probably noticed. I kept my eyes on the towel I was folding, trying to keep my voice neutral. What kind of changes? Well, Emma graduates next year. She's already got job prospects in Chicago. And you're so independent now, you've got your own life, your own apartment. Maybe it's time your father and I stopped pretending we're happy together. The casual way she said it made my stomach clench. Like she was discussing the weather, not the destruction of our family. Like she assumed I'd automatically accept responsibility for picking up the pieces. Have you talked to Dad about this? I asked. Not yet. But I will. I just want to make sure I have all my ducks in a row first. I want to make sure you understand that this isn't about you kids. This is about me finally being honest about what I want from my life. What she wanted from her life. I almost laughed at the irony. My mother was planning to pursue her happiness at the expense of everyone else's stability, and she was framing it as some kind of enlightened self-discovery. What about Dad? I asked. How will he manage financially? Mom's face took on that expression I knew so well. The one that meant she was about to ask me to solve a problem that wasn't mine to solve. Well, you've been helping with the bills for years. I'm sure you two can work something out. Your father's going to need support during this transition. And you've always been so good at taking care of people. There it was. The assumption that had shaped my entire adult life. The assumption that I existed to clean up other people's messes, to sacrifice my own goals for their convenience, to be the solution to problems I hadn't created. I might not be able to help as much as I have been, I said carefully. I'm thinking about going back to school. I might need to cut back on expenses. Mom's expression shifted, and I saw something flicker across her face that I'd never seen before. Not just disappointment, but something that looked almost like panic. School? At your age? Sarah, honey, you've got a good job. You've got stability. Why would you want to risk all that? Because I want to study graphic design. It's what I've always been interested in. But that's not practical. That's not a real career. You need to think about security, about being able to support yourself. The irony was breathtaking. My mother, who was planning to abandon her family for a man she'd been seeing behind my father's back, was lecturing me about security and responsibility. I've been thinking about it for a while, I said. I want to have a career that excites me. Sarah, you're 26 years old. You can't just throw away everything you've built to chase some childhood dream. You have responsibilities. People depend on you. People depend on you. The phrase that had defined my entire life. The phrase that had kept me small and safe and invisible. I know people depend on me, I said quietly. But I'm starting to think that maybe I've been depending on the wrong people too. Mom stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out how to respond. She'd never had to convince me to be responsible before. My compliance had always been automatic. I think you're going through a phase, she said finally. Everyone has moments where they wonder, what if? But you're too smart to make decisions based on fantasies. You're too practical to risk everything for something that might not work out. She was using my own supposed virtues against me. Telling me I was too practical to pursue my dreams, too responsible to prioritize my own happiness, too smart to believe I deserved better, but I was learning something important. I was learning that the people who benefit from your sacrifices will always have excellent reasons why you should continue making them. They'll frame their needs as your duty, their wants as your responsibility, their comfort as your purpose. Maybe, I said. But I'm still going to think about it. That night, I went home and looked at my secret savings account. I'd been careful, setting aside small amounts each month, but it was growing. It was becoming real. The possibility of a different life was taking shape in numbers and plans and late-night research sessions. I called the admissions office at the university and requested application materials. I scheduled a campus visit for the following month. I started imagining myself in classes, learning skills that excited me, building a career that belonged to me, but I also started noticing how my family was watching me more closely. Dad called more frequently, usually with small requests that required me to come over. Mom started inviting me to more family dinners, more shopping trips, more activities that reinforced our old patterns. Emma called one evening, which was unusual. She rarely called unless she needed something. Mom says you're thinking about going back to school, she said without preamble. I'm considering it. But what about helping Dad? Mom said she might need to make some changes, and if you're not available to help him, even Emma. Even my sister, who'd benefited from my sacrifices her entire life, was calling to remind me of my obligations. Dad's an adult, Emma. He can figure out how to manage his own life. But you've always been the one who takes care of things. You're good at it. It's what you do. It's what you do. Not, it's what you choose to do, or it's generous of you to do. It's what you do, like breathing or having brown eyes. Like it wasn't a choice at all. Maybe it's time for other people to learn how to take care of things, I said. There was a pause, and when Emma spoke again, her voice had that wounded tone that had always made me feel guilty. I don't understand why you're being like this. We're family. We're supposed to help each other. You're right, I said. We are supposed to help each other. But help should go both ways. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment and realized that my family was closing ranks. They could sense that I was pulling away, and they were trying to pull me back into line. They were reminding me of my role, my duties, my place in the family structure, but they were also revealing something important. They were showing me how much they'd been taking for granted. They were showing me that my value to them was entirely Based on what I could do for them, not who I was as a person, and that realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. It was heartbreaking because it meant that the family I'd been trying to preserve didn't actually exist. It was liberating because it meant I could stop trying to preserve something that had never been real. I was ready to stop playing a role in someone else's story. I was ready to start writing my own. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday in late spring, and I was at my parents' house helping Dad with some yard work. Mom was supposed to be running errands, but she'd been gone for over 4 hours. Dad was getting increasingly agitated, checking his phone every few minutes. "Where the hell is she?" he muttered, pulling weeds with unnecessary force. She said she'd be back by noon. It was nearly 3 o'clock. I knew where she probably was, but I couldn't say anything without revealing what I'd overheard months earlier. Instead, I just kept working, trying to ignore the growing tension. When Mom finally pulled into the driveway, her face was flushed and her hair was slightly mussed. She looked like someone who'd been living a secret life, which I supposed she had been. "Sorry I'm late," she called out as she walked toward us. "I ran into an old friend at the grocery store, and we got to talking." Dad didn't even look up from the flower bed he was weeding. 4 hours of talking? You know how it is. Time just got away from me. But I could see the guilt in her eyes, and I could see Dad's suspicion. The facade was cracking, and I was caught in the middle of a situation that was about to explode. That's when Mom made her mistake. She tried to deflect attention from herself by putting it on me. "Sarah, honey, I've been thinking about what you said. About school. I really think you should reconsider. Your father's going to need more help around here, especially with his back getting worse." Dad looked up sharply. "What about school?" "Oh, Sarah's having some kind of quarter-life crisis. She wants to go back to college to study art or something." The way she said it, dismissive, almost mocking. Like my dreams were a joke, like my desire for something more than endless caretaking was just immaturity. "Is that true?" Dad asked, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "You're thinking about leaving?" "I'm thinking about going back to school," I said carefully. "I'm not leaving. I'm just expanding my options." "But school costs money," Dad said. "And if you're in school, you can't help us as much." "What about the bills? What about when I need help with things around the house?" I looked at both of them, and suddenly I felt like I was suffocating. Here they were, planning their own major life changes, and their biggest concern was how those changes would affect my availability to serve their needs. "I've been helping for 10 years, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Maybe it's time for me to help myself." "Help yourself?" Mom's voice rose. "Sarah, we're your family. We've always been there for you. This is what families do for each other." "When?" I asked. "When have you been there for me?" The question hung in the air between us. Dad stopped weeding and stood up, his face confused. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words. "What do you mean?" Dad asked finally. "I mean, when have either of you ever asked what I wanted? When have you ever supported my dreams? When have you ever made a sacrifice for me? The way I've made sacrifices for you." "We sacrificed everything for you kids," Mom said, her voice getting defensive. "We worked our butts off to give you and Emma a good life." "You worked to give Emma a good life," I said. "You worked to give Emma opportunities. I worked to give both of you a good life." "That's not fair," Dad said. "We never asked you to." "Yes, you did," I interrupted. "You asked every time you called with a crisis. You asked every time you needed money. You asked every time you assumed I'd handle whatever problem you didn't want to deal with." "We asked because we knew you cared about us," Mom said. "We asked because we knew you loved us. And I do love you. But I'm starting to understand that love shouldn't require me to disappear." Mom's face went pale. "You're being dramatic, Sarah. No one's asking you to disappear. Aren't you? You're planning to leave Dad and assume I'll take care of him. You're planning to start a new life with Michael while I'm left to deal with the wreckage of this one." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, then something that looked like devastation. "What did you just say?" he asked quietly. Mom's face had gone completely white. "Sarah, I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard you talking to Michael 3 months ago," I said. "I heard you planning your exit strategy. I heard you discussing how I'd take care of Dad after you left." Dad sank down onto the porch steps, and I could see him aging 10 years in 10 seconds. "Michael? Michael from your book club? Harold, I can explain. How long?" Dad's voice was barely a whisper. "How long have you been?" 2 years, Mom said, and her voice was so small I almost didn't hear her. "But it's not what you think. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was so unhappy, and Michael understands me in a way that." 2 years, Dad repeated. 2 years you've been lying to me. 2 years you've been planning to leave me." "I wasn't planning anything," Mom said desperately. I was trying to figure out what I wanted. And what you wanted was to abandon your family, I said. What you wanted was to pursue your happiness while leaving me to clean up the mess. Mom turned to me, and I saw anger flash in her eyes. You think you're so perfect, don't you? You think you're the only one who's ever sacrificed anything? I've spent 26 years of my life being a wife and mother, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of putting everyone else's needs first. So you decided to put your needs first by making them my responsibility? I never said that. You didn't have to say it. You've been saying it my entire life. Every time you called me the responsible one, every time you told me how much you depended on me, every time you made me feel guilty for wanting something for myself. Dad was still sitting on the steps, his head in his hands. I can't believe this is happening. I'm sorry, Harold, Mom said. I didn't want you to find out this way. I was going to tell you when the time was right. When would the time be right? He asked. When would it be right to destroy our family? Our family's been broken for years, Mom said. We've just been pretending it wasn't. I wasn't pretending, Dad said. I was trying. Well, I'm tired of trying, Mom said. I'm tired of pretending to be happy in a marriage that died years ago. I'm tired of being someone I'm not. And I'm tired of being someone I never chose to be, I said. I'm tired of being the family caretaker. I'm tired of being the one who holds everything together while everyone else gets to fall apart. Both of them looked at me, and I could see that they were finally hearing me. Not just listening, but actually hearing. Sarah, honey, Mom said, her voice softer now. You don't understand. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. This is different. How is it different? How is your right to pursue happiness more important than mine? Because I've already given the best years of my life to this family. Because I've already sacrificed everything for you kids. And I've been sacrificing everything for you, I said. For 10 years, I've been giving you the best years of my life. When do I get to stop? When you have a family of your own, Mom said. When you have someone who depends on you the way we depend on you. I want to have a family of my own, I said. But I can't do that while I'm busy being the parent in this family. The truth of that statement hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so busy taking care of everyone else that I hadn't had time to build a life of my own. I'd been so busy being the solution to everyone else's problems that I hadn't had space to dream about my own future. I'm going back to school, I said. I'm going to study graphic design. I'm going to build a career that excites me. And I'm going to stop being the family crisis manager. Sarah, please, Dad said. Don't abandon me too. I'm not abandoning you, Dad. I'm choosing myself for once. I'm choosing to believe that I deserve a life that's mine. But what about me? He asked. What about the bills? What about when I need help? You'll figure it out, I said. The same way I've been figuring out how to have a life while supporting all of you. I walked to my car, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of their confrontation. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, still sitting on the porch steps, finally having the conversation they should have had years ago, but I wasn't driving away from them. I was driving toward something. I was driving toward a life that belonged to me, toward dreams that were mine to pursue, toward a future that I would build for myself, for the first time in my adult life. I was choosing me. The weeks following that confrontation were some of the hardest of my life, but also some of the most clarifying. My family went through the motions of trying to guilt me back into my old role, but something fundamental had shifted. I'd said the things that needed to be said, and I couldn't unsay them. Mom moved out 2 weeks later. She didn't ask for my help with the logistics, which was probably wise. She packed her things while Dad was at work, left a note on the kitchen table, and disappeared into her new life with Michael. Just like that, 26 years of marriage reduced to a folded piece of paper and an empty closet. Dad called me that night, crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears of someone processing grief, but the raw, desperate sobs of someone whose world had collapsed. She's gone, he said. She's really gone. I don't know how to do this, Sarah. I don't know how to live without her. My first instinct was to drop everything and rush over there. My first instinct was to pack a bag and move back home and help him figure out how to rebuild his life. My first instinct was to fall back into the role of the family caretaker, the one who fixed everything and everyone, but I didn't. I stayed in my apartment, holding the phone, listening to my father's pain, and feeling my own heart break for him while also protecting the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. I'm so sorry, Dad, I said. I know this is devastating. I know you're in pain. Can you come over? Can you stay with me tonight? I don't want to be alone. I can't, I said, and the words felt like swallowing glass. I can't come over and take care of this for you. You need to process this yourself. But I need help. I need someone to tell me what to do. You need to grieve. You need to feel angry and sad and confused. You need to sit with these feelings instead of asking someone else to make them go away. I don't know how to do that. You'll learn. The same way I learned how to take care of everyone else's feelings. You'll learn because you have to. He was quiet for a long moment. Are you punishing me? Are you punishing me for what your mother did? The question hung between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. For a moment, I almost fell back into the old pattern of reassuring him, of making his pain smaller so he could handle it. No, Dad. I'm not punishing you. I'm not rescuing you either. There's a difference. I don't understand the difference. The difference is that punishment is about making you hurt. What I'm doing is about making me whole. He was quiet. For so long I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. I don't know how to be alone, Sarah. I've been with your mother since I was 22. I don't know how to cook for myself or manage the bills or any of it. Then you'll learn. You're 54 years old, Dad. You're not helpless. But it's so much easier when you help me. Easier for you. But not easier for me. And I matter too. Those words, I matter too, felt like the most radical thing I'd ever said. For 26 years, I'd lived as if everyone else's comfort was more important than my own existence. For 26 years, I'd been the supporting character in everyone else's story. Of course you matter, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. You've always mattered. No, I haven't. I've been useful. I've been reliable. I've been the solution to problems I didn't create. But I haven't mattered. As a person with my own dreams and needs and desires. Sarah, please. I'm drowning here. I'm falling apart, and you're talking about philosophy. I'm talking about survival, Dad. Your survival and mine. You need to learn how to live your own life, and I need to learn how to live mine. What if I can't? What if I'm too old to start over? Then you'll figure it out anyway. Because the alternative is staying stuck in a life that doesn't work. I stayed on the phone with him for another hour, listening to his fears and confusion without trying to fix them. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, caring about someone's pain without taking responsibility for healing it over. The next few months, I watched my family's old structure completely collapse. Dad struggled with loneliness and practical matters he'd never had to handle alone. Emma finished her degree and moved to Chicago for a job with a symphony orchestra, pursuing the dreams that my sacrifices had made possible. Mom disappeared into her new life with Michael, occasionally sending brief texts that felt more like obligation than genuine connection, and I applied to the graphic design program. I was accepted. I gave notice at the medical office where I'd been marking time for years. I found a small apartment near campus and began the process of building a life that belonged entirely to me. The hardest part wasn't the practical logistics. The hardest part was learning to trust my own judgment about what I wanted and needed. For so long, I'd been so focused on everyone else's desires that I'd forgotten how to recognize my own. I remember my first day of classes, sitting in a design studio surrounded by people who were passionate about creating beautiful things. The professor was talking about the importance of visual storytelling, about how design could communicate emotions and ideas that words couldn't capture, and I realized I was finally in a place where I could tell my own story. Not the story of the responsible daughter or the family caretaker, but the story of a woman who'd learned to value herself enough to choose her own path. Dad called me that night, which had become a pattern. But this time, instead of asking for help or complaining about his loneliness, he said something that surprised me. I drove by your old apartment today. Saw the for rent sign. It really hit me that you're gone. That you're really starting over. How does that make you feel? I asked. Terrified, he said honestly. But also, I don't know. Maybe a little proud? I never thought about it before, but it takes guts to leave everything behind and start over. It does. But staying takes guts too. You're doing something brave by learning to live alone. I burned dinner again tonight, he said, and I could hear him smiling. But I didn't call you to come fix it. I ordered pizza and tried again. That's progress, Dad. Yeah, maybe it is. 2 years have passed since I walked away from my role as the family caretaker. 2 years since I stopped defining myself by my usefulness to people who had forgotten to see me as a person. I'm in my final semester of the graphic design program now, and I've never been happier. Not the desperate, grateful happiness of someone who's settling for scraps, but the deep, satisfied happiness of someone who's living authentically. My apartment is small, but it's mine. The walls are covered with my artwork, designs that represent ideas and dreams I never knew I had. I have friends who know me as Sarah the artist, not Sarah the problem solver. I have professors who challenge me to think bigger, to create bolder, to trust my own creative instincts, and I have a life that belongs to me. Dad and I talk every few weeks now. Our conversations are different, shorter, but more genuine. He's learned to cook basic meals and manage his finances. He's started attending a support group for men going through divorce. He's even started dating, which surprised both of us. I never thought I'd be someone who could start over at 56, he told me recently. But maybe that's what I needed to learn. Maybe I needed to learn that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Maybe we both needed to learn that, I said, Emma. And I have a complicated relationship now. She's successful and talented, everything our family always said she would be. But she's also angry with me for abandoning Dad during the divorce. She doesn't understand that I didn't abandon him. I just stopped carrying him. You used to be the one who kept us all together, she said during one of our rare phone calls. Now look at us. We're scattered across the country, barely talking to each other. We were never really together, I told her. We were just held together by my willingness to sacrifice myself for everyone else's comfort. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's true. She hasn't called since then, and I'm learning to be okay with that. I'm learning that you can love someone and still refuse to be responsible for their happiness. I'm learning that healthy relationships require mutual respect, not just mutual need. As for Mom, she sends me Christmas cards now. Brief, impersonal messages that feel like afterthoughts. She's married to Michael and living in Florida. She seems happy, which I suppose is what she wanted all along. I don't hate her for choosing herself. I just wish she'd taught me that I was allowed to make that choice too. Last month, I got my first freelance design job. A small nonprofit that helps women leaving abusive relationships. They needed someone to redesign their website and marketing materials. The pay wasn't much, but the work felt meaningful in a way that filing insurance claims never had. I found myself designing graphics that represented transformation, images that showed women stepping from darkness into light. And I realized I was designing my own story, the story of a woman who'd learned to save herself, the director of the nonprofit, a woman named Carol who'd left her own abusive marriage 10 years earlier, looked at my designs and smiled. These are beautiful, she said. You really understand what it means to start over. I'm learning, I said. It's not easy, is it? Choosing yourself when everyone expects you to choose them. No. It's not easy. But it's worth it. The hardest part, Carol said, is learning to trust your own judgment. When you've spent so long being told what you should want, it takes time to figure out what you actually want. She was right. I'm still figuring it out. I'm still learning to recognize my own voice after decades of listening to everyone else's. I'm still learning to trust my instincts, to believe that my dreams are worth pursuing, to understand that my happiness matters, but I'm getting there. Day by day, choice by choice, I'm building a life that reflects who I really am instead of who I thought I needed to be. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never overheard that conversation between Mom and Michael. Would I have continued being the family caretaker forever? Would I have sacrificed my entire life to preserve a marriage that was already over? Maybe. But I don't think so. I think I was already changing, already questioning the role I'd been playing. I think that conversation just gave me permission to stop pretending I was happy being invisible. I've learned that you can't save people who don't want to be saved. You can't fix relationships that are fundamentally broken. You can't love someone into being the person you need them to be, but you can save yourself. You can fix your own life. You can love yourself enough to become the person you were meant to be. I'm not the responsible daughter anymore. I'm not the family caretaker or the crisis manager or the silent sacrifice. I'm an artist, a student, a woman who's learning to take up space in her own life, and that feels like the most important work I've ever done. Tonight, I'm working on a new design project. It's a series of illustrations about women who've found the courage to rewrite their stories. Women who've learned that love doesn't require erasure, that family doesn't require servitude, that caring for others doesn't mean disappearing yourself. One of the illustrations shows a woman walking away from a house, carrying a suitcase. But she's not running, she's walking with purpose, with dignity, with the quiet confidence of someone who knows her own worth. The caption reads, "Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be smaller than you are." I think that's what I've learned. I've learned that real love, the kind that actually nourishes and sustains, doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. Real love sees you as you are and celebrates your growth, your dreams, your right to exist fully. I've learned that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They keep out what doesn't serve you and let in what does. I've learned that you can grieve the family you thought you had while building the life you actually want, and I've learned that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's essential. It's the foundation that everything else is built on. My name is Sarah. I'm 28 years old. I'm a graphic design student, an artist, a woman who's learning to trust her own voice, and for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered whether your dreams matter, if you've ever felt guilty for wanting something more, I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that you deserve to take up space in your own story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between being needed and being yourself? How did you find the courage to choose yourself, and if this story resonated with you, subscribe for more stories about finding your way back to yourself. Because sometimes the most important journey is the one that leads you home, to who you really are.